Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Pain, Heart and Home Healing After Loss. You guys are just going to love this guest that I have here today. She is just the sweetest person, but more than that, she's no stranger to grief. She is someone I really enjoy following on social media because almost every time she posts something, I'm like, yes, I can relate to that. She specializes in grief and trauma recovery, and she's all about giving grievers like a deeper understanding of what grief is and how it can affect us, and I just love her whole body approach, as she calls it. So today I have with me licensed therapist and grief coach Rio Richards. Rio, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, of course, me too. So, just for context, I want my listeners to just understand like where your experience comes from. So, if you wouldn't mind just briefly letting everyone know, like, who is it in your life that you've lost?
Mhm.
How long ago was it? And just how you got on this path of being a therapist and grief and trauma expert.
Sure. Yeah. I was already working as a therapist in 2019 when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in October. And so that was the end of 2019. And so, as we all know, beginning of the next year, COVID hit. And I became a caregiver for my dad on his cancer journey. And so, being a therapist while going through the experience of the most emotional, physical, mental turmoil I had ever been in my life was such a juxtaposition. There were so many things that were starting to not fit. Like, why have I never heard someone talk about this experience? And this is before his death. I was just like, this amount of stress, this amount of chronic fear. Of course, we are educated in trauma and yada, yada, yada. But when it came to grief and illness, that was something that I had really not been exposed to in my education. And when my dad died ultimately in March of 2021, so a little over a year, was how long he was sick. When he died in 2021, that changed everything. I really couldn't think or I couldn't think about anything else other than my grief and loss and how disorienting the experience was and what I saw happening to my mom and what happened to my family and just it truly felt unbelievable. And still looking back at that time, I have that sense of like, God, did that really happen? Like, it feels like someone else's life. Like, I'm remembering a movie. It was so unbelievable, the amount of stress and heartbreak and devastation. And so that really never went away, that feeling of, what is this? What's going on? What's happening to my body? After his death, I became very, very angry, which was not like a default setting of mine in particular in times of stress or even heartbreak. And so that really launched me into this entire world. Was I suddenly was just, I couldn't unsee how much our culture, how much my own education as a therapist, how much, the field I was in, we weren't talking about it, and everyone was confused. And 4 months after he died, I was invited to work as a bereavement therapist at a hospice foundation. And so, as I was in the depths of my own very early grief, I began sitting with other grievers, helping them through their experience. And that was profound for so many reasons. But that was also just sort of solidified my like, okay, there's something here that's missing for all of us. And now my teeth are sunk in and I can't let this go. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of shorter version of how I got here.
Yeah, and that's so interesting to me that you were a therapist before you experienced loss. And even as a therapist, like as a licensed therapist, you still felt like, I love the word that you used, like it was disorienting, like,
Mm-hmm.
because that is such a perfect word to describe like sudden or tragic loss. It's disorienting. And so it's very interesting to hear that even as a licensed therapist at the time, even though you weren't necessarily in the world of grief, that we would look up to you and go, well, you could probably get through this because you're a therapist, you know? And even for
Exactly.
you, it was completely disorienting and life altering. And you, like you said, you look back and you're like, was that my life? Did that happen to me? Am I remembering a movie? So that's all very interesting. One of the things, kind of like taking a little bit of a turn for a second because I want to spend some time talking about this. So first of all, some background info on some of the things that Rio posts, like on Instagram specifically. That's where I follow you. One of my favorite things that you put out there on social media are those videos where you're like almost role playing, and they make me laugh just thinking about them. It'll be like between someone who's like grieving with someone who's not grieving, or you know, it'll be you know, something someone says versus what a griever really hears, kind of things like that. And if you don't follow her, you have to, and you have to watch. I'll put her info in the show notes, and you have to watch these videos because they're honestly so hilarious and so relatable. And every time I watch one, I always just feel like, thank God someone else out there. There's someone else out there who gets this and feels the way that I do. And so
Yeah.
one of my questions is, because this is a very serious field that you're in, what inspired you to start doing videos like this? Because they're very lighthearted, and they have some sort of humor spin on them. And I love it because even in the very, very serious world of loss and grief, they are lighthearted. And for some reason, even though I know this deep pain, when I see this, I'm like, it's hilarious. Like, I love to see that kind of content. So, like, what inspired you to put it out there?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about. I don't think I've talked about this yet on a podcast. So thank you for the question.
Of course.
I Well, it feels really full circle for me because my dad was the funniest person I've ever known to date. Like his sense of humor, I mean, he lived by humor and making people laugh. And, he was the youngest of five boys. And I always used to say, like, yeah, he's my dad, but he's also like a giant 17-year-old. Like he's just playful, like youthful, playful. That was just his whole energy. And he really never took anything seriously, really ever, up until he died. And so humor for me has always been such an integral part of how I process anything. So somehow I can take the darkest thing that I'm talking about and find some sort of just ridiculousness in it. And that's not for everyone. Humor, is not for every griever. But it's been amazing to see how many people relate or find comfort in that as well. So it really, I made the first video, that first like funny skit, a while back, and I was nervous about putting that out there. But I was like, does anyone else feel like how society is trying to support grievers, but sort of like the backhand, we're here for you, but don't you dare talk about it. Like all of that messaging, how confusing that is and how just like silly it is. And it leaves you feeling like, what the F?
Yeah.
And so I put it out there and I was like, oh, I don't know. I might get like pushback or people might not get it. But the response was overwhelmingly like, yes, this has been my experience. Oh my gosh, this is exactly what it feels like. And so I learned quickly that I was not the only one who was like, seeing things in this way, or who, was in pain, but also just noticing the ridiculousness of the systems and all of it. So yeah, the humor and the sarcasm in the videos definitely came to me naturally. And it really was once I saw people resonating with that, I was like, okay, I'll just keep doing my thing.
Yeah, and your followers, they love it, and so do I. And first of all, I love that you can kind of tie that all back to your dad, because that's just one more way on top of, I'm sure, all of the other ways that you honor him and you continue to include him in your life. So I love that, first of all. But yeah, what you said, the reason they're funny is because it just highlights how ridiculous people handle grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel bad saying that because it's nobody's fault. Like, there's no, I would have people say like ridiculous things to me, and I'm like, and at first, like, it frustrated the heck out of me, and I'm like, oh my God, like, stop saying that to me. How could you say, like, and it would just annoy me so much. Then the more, like, the longer I've been, on this journey, and the more research I've done and the more experts I talk to, I'm like, the reason that this is there is because there's such a lack of, like, information. And I don't want to go down that road yet because I want to come back to that maybe a little bit later. But the reason I love these videos is because, like you said, it's not just necessarily taking something dark and putting a humor spin on it. There's actually truth to these videos. And the reason they're funny is because you're like, that sounds so ridiculous, and you're like, yeah, but this is actually how it works in the real world. Like, one of my favorite ones that you did was kind of recent, I think. It was like when somebody like breaks a leg and they like return back to work, and you're like, oh, crutches. Like, well, you don't want to use crutches for too long. Like, and it's like, because nobody would ever treat a physical ailment like that, but that's how we're viewed as grievers. Like, the things that we use for support and the things that we use to get through loss is like, well, you don't want to do that for too long. And it's like, you would never say that to somebody who's got a broken leg or whatever. I'm totally butchering the video, so you got to go watch it yourself for all those listening. But I just love
No, you're
them.
doing great. Yeah.
But one of the videos that I just love, and you put right on top of the video, like, the caption is your point of view, your perfectionist part calls an emergency meeting with your grieving parts. And the whole video is you as the perfectionist talking to the grieving parts of yourself, and you're saying things like, well, if you're going to grieve, you're going to do this right. Like, and you're not going to do it too much, and you're not going to do it for too long, and you're going to keep being productive, and you're going to keep being reliable for people, and we can't have people not think that we know what we're doing, or that we don't know what we're doing, and like all of these things. And that one was so funny to me because I'm like, that's me. Like, that is my daily dialogue that I like have with myself. And I used to be such a perfectionist, and I say used to because I have changed so much, like a lot since my loss, and I definitely still battle with all of these thoughts, like, okay, I'm gonna grieve, but I'm gonna grieve in like an orderly fashion. But it's just not how it works. So I want to talk about this topic for a little bit, because I know that you talk about it a lot, how grieving kind of collides with perfectionism. And because I think it'll resonate with a lot of people. So, like, what specific problems that don't necessarily arise for people who aren't perfectionists, what specific problems that we as perfectionists arise, like, when we're grieving?
Yeah, I mean, I think grief in every sense demands the very opposite of what perfectionism is pushing for, in every sense. Perfectionism, if perfectionism is the combination of high self-criticism and high expectations, grief is high criticism and I can't even come close to meeting those expectations. And so it bumps up against that part of us in every way possible. Perfectionism seeks control, it seeks predictability, and when I say seeking, this is all just seeking comfort. When you hear control or predictability or structure, that's really just our nervous system seeking safety. And grief is just, can I swear on this podcast, or would you rather me not? Okay. It's just a shitstorm of like, every emotion. It's messy. It's unpredictable. We need things we've never needed before. We can't do things that we used to be able to do without even, a second thought. And so in every way, if someone has a tendency towards perfectionism, their standards of themselves has to change. And so that video, I make fun of a lot of like our culture and how it approaches grief, but I also just make fun of ourselves. I think there's something healing in that, just kind of looking at like the ways that we attack ourselves for not doing something right or being what we should be and say like, is that really fair? Like, does that really fit here? Um, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and going off of what you were just saying, I know that a lot of times because I was terrible at that at first, but now I try to remind myself like what expectations would I be putting on someone else
Mm-hmm.
if someone else that I loved was me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the expectations that I put on myself, like would I be putting those on the people that I love? Like no, of course I wouldn't because I would look at that and go, oh my gosh, of course you need extra time and
Yeah.
space. Of course your mind isn't working at full capacity. Like, of course this, of course that. But for some reason, and when it comes to myself, I just expect myself to be who I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a couple of examples that you put out there that resonated with me. So if you're listening to this and you kind of fall into that perfectionist category, it can kind of show up in things like, and these are Rio's examples, like not finishing like a memorial project because it'll like never be good enough. Like that one
Mm-hmm.
resonated with me a lot. Or
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, am I feeling the right things at the right time, like on my grief journey? Or and this one was definitely me, avoiding the support that you need because I can do it on my own.
Yeah.
Like I pushed off support for months because I was like, nothing that anybody's going to say is going to make anything better for me, and
Mm-hmm.
of course I was terribly wrong. Or, comparing your grief to others, apologizing for talking about it, or, feeling the need to express your feelings and make it a part of conversation. And another one was that you talk about is like appearing to be strong and put together. And so these are all the ways that you don't have to be a perfectionist to deal with these things. But if you do kind of fall in that category, these are like the extra layers that come with, that grieving process that maybe not, everybody sees.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know for me, I have questioned literally everything I've wanted to do with my life many times since
Mm-hmm.
my loss.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from knowing the identity that I created for myself before my loss.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm a very different person now with a whole new perspective and different values and different way of living, I still find myself kind of putting pressure on myself to fill a role or to live up to an identity that I created for myself pre-loss,
Mm-hmm.
because it was like I was a perfectionist. I was all about being productive and going hard on things and constantly going and going and going and moving and shaking and all these things. And don't get me wrong, I still love being productive. Like that part of me hasn't gone away. And I love a good, tidied up, clean home. And at the end of the day, like no matter how crazy my day was, I still like putting the pillows back and tidying the bedroom and vacuuming the floors and whatever. But I've learned so much about myself and how grief has affected me, not just mentally and emotionally, but physically too, that I have had to adjust my lifestyle completely.
Yeah.
And I've had to slow down, and I've had to take a step back on things because I simply don't have the capacity all of the time
Mm-hmm.
anymore like I used
Mm-hmm.
to. And I think, and I know that's a universal problem. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. Can you kind of explain to everyone who's listening how, like literally, not just figuratively, but literally our capacity to do things and how we manage things in life change
Mm-hmm.
after we suffer a loss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what's not talked about, unless you're like in this space and doing the deep dives on our accounts or like
Yeah.
reading the research, it's not talked about a lot is that in grief, uh, because you are, well, essentially in grief, you are thrown into survival. You're thrown into a state of survival. This is major, major attachment loss, attachment rupture. There's a lot of fear. There, are changes to the brain happening. There are changes to the body happening. And all of those changes are because your entire system is saying, we are in danger. Let's send all of our resources towards our systems that brace and get us ready to run, to fight, to shut down, are ready for the threat. So we are taking resources away from the parts of the brain that are responsible for logic and decision making and planning, all of these day-to-day things that we're all so used to having full access to and being able to use without any thought suddenly become, those tasks become like Herculean efforts to do. And you're like, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I like make it through this one email or do this one thing, or I can't handle this one task. And it's really because all of your systems are saying that matters so much less than the bear that we can hear in the bushes behind us. And that's the thing about loss, is it's not a fender bender where the threat happens and you realize like there's safety and like, okay, you're shaken up, but cars drive off and then the thing is done. The absence is ongoing. It's everywhere, and so our systems are, I don't even want to say majority of the time because I can't know that to be true for everyone, but often, and everyone that I see, their systems are stuck in a chronic state of survival, of some sort of protective state, because the loss is ongoing, because the absence does not end. And so our bodies, our brains, our hearts, our energy, our souls, like we have to reorient to a new reality. That is a gigantic task. So it's not just, oh, I've lost someone and I have to, feel sad about that for a while and then go back to regular life. It's like everything has changed after significant loss, after major devastation. And that's certainly a piece that I was not hearing anything about when I was going through my loss, even when I was going through my training at my first grief bereavement therapist position. There was no talk about how grief affects digestion and brain fog and immune system and oh my gosh, your entire body, is just, everything's freaking out, and for good reason.
Yeah. First of all, I think that's crazy that there was no talk of that in your, first portion of training, because that's one of the, so I mentioned that I was like, nobody's going to be able to say anything to help me, get through. But the reason is because I was literally living in that chronic state that you were just describing, that chronic state of stress and fight or flight. I was living in it. And so my thought process was like, once I get healthy, then I'll go to, counseling or therapy or something like that. But what my grief coach did, the first thing she did once I agreed to it was like, she's like, we got to calm down your nervous system. Like that was the first thing she did. And I'm sure that you have a very similar approach, because that's what you talk about, is like, no, that's like step number one, like, because nobody's putting that information out there. Maybe not anymore, because there's people like you and I who are like, this is where you need to start, because we've seen such a lack of information out there. And one of the things that she always said, and you just kind of said it, that she always told me was, when you first suffer a loss, like your life becomes I'm going to butcher her phrase, but it becomes a total reevaluation. Like you just said, like reorienting your life is a gigantic task. And she always says that it becomes a reevaluation, but it's at a time where you have the least amount of energy to reevaluate anything, and that's why it's so difficult. And I have firsthand experience with this. It can feel so incredibly frustrating to people if we're not educated on how grief impacts us physically, specifically as humans. I had no idea how much of a physical impact grief had on our bodies, and how it can affect the way that we think and process. So, I'm no expert, but because of my own experience and having talked to lots of experts now, I know, like, I try to educate people as quickly as I possibly can whenever I'm talking to someone who feels really lost or who is stuck in that chronic state like you were talking about, or at least direct them to somebody that I know that can help them really quickly, like with this kind of information.
Yeah.
But like, because nobody handed me like a manual, nobody was like, I just so happened to be friends with people who were related to a grief coach.
Oh,
like
okay.
when I first suffered my loss, like the first people that popped up on my feed when I was searching, like, lost and stuff, it wasn't accounts like yours. It was accounts like other women just talking about how sad they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so and that's why I'm so grateful for accounts like yours, because I'm like, we need more of these people talking about, educating and putting real information out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I that's where my, healing journey, I'll call it, began. Because I didn't even know that I needed any sort of healing journey or, education or anything like that. The doctor who, delivered my baby, because I had a stillbirth, like, she didn't tell me to, like, follow up with, grief support.
Right.
Nobody was following me around afterwards, like, making sure I was educating myself on how grief affects you and all these things. So I guess my next question for you would be, like, where do people start? Because, like I said, I got lucky, I guess. I didn't have to, like, wait very long for someone who could help me get me out of this pit that I was in. And I'm not saying, like, oh, I'm perfect and I'm all better. I'm just saying, like, I got the right education fairly quickly compared to a lot of other people who live like this for a long time. But if people are really, truly looking to stop feeling stuck and, want to start healing or just, I guess continue to move forward, like, where would you direct them to start?
Sure. So I'll back up just a click and just share that I started also with just education. I didn't know to start there. I didn't even know that grief accounts existed on Instagram. I just had my personal account, was not searching for anything on there. I really, truly did not even know that they existed. And now that I'm in this space, boy, are we everywhere. And I'm so glad for it. But I just started with books, and I started with some websites that I found. And it really, there are going to be different approaches that people take to loss, that experts take to loss. No shade on any expert ever. Sometimes I use the word fluffy. Like, there were some accounts that felt like there were a lot of, like, nice, comforting words, but I was like, but what does that mean? Like, what is my body doing? Why do I feel like an asshole all of the time? Like, someone tell me that. And so I really did my own deep dive research into all of that. And so for me, I always tell people, like, I have a handful of books and resources, but I think sometimes that's the best place to start. Like, look for accounts, scroll through some things, like, look at what resonates with you. I wouldn't suggest someone who's in early grief to jump into, like, a program or anything that's going to require this huge commitment. Like, you don't have the energy, the capacity, the time. So many things out there are not trauma informed, so they have no idea what your capacity and your window of tolerance is. And so I kind of find that self-exploration safest, but also energy and time and capacity. Like, a lot of people in early grief they don't even know where to start. They don't know where to go. So I sometimes will say that social media maybe is that, like, get little doses, see what resonates with you there. For example, you can look at my Instagram and see these different educational pieces. What speaks to your experience? Then I have a newsletter that you can sign up for, and that's a little bit of a deeper dive. But in terms of where to start, I think that really depends on someone's capacity.
Yeah, totally. And I'm so grateful you mentioned that, because there is something to be said, and you just said it, that people who are very early on in their grief, there is a season of literally just grieving.
Yeah.
It's not meant to figure anything out. It's not meant to make any life-altering decisions. I actually think it's kind of crazy, the kind of decisions we have to make early on in our grief. Like, for example, I'll just throw this out there. Like, so I had a stillbirth, and my husband and I were talking, or maybe it was my mom and I can't remember. We were talking about the questions that the doctors, or just the hospital staff, were asking me right after I gave birth to my dead child. And I was like, why was I the person, in what state of mind did you think I was in order? And they were like big decisions. Like, these were things that, like, mattered, to our future and our life. And I was like, I mean, thankfully, I was surrounded by people who really love me and really know me and were able to help me make these decisions. But, like, not everybody has that. And not
Yeah.
only that, I just think it's crazy that the expectations that people have on early grievers. And so I think that's crazy. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that when you're early on, there's really nothing to figure out.
No.
There's simply something really beautiful, and it doesn't feel beautiful in the moment. But now, I'm 2.5 years out from my big loss, and I can look back and I can see the beauty in me grieving so heavily my daughter during those times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not looking for, you, if you're listening and you're early on in your grief, I'm not looking for you to view this as beautiful. But what I am, trying to do is to allow you to relieve a burden off of yourself, off of your shoulders, of having to figure anything out right now. Because there is a time and a place for just simply grieving. And like Rio said, getting kind of, you have to sort through what feels right to you and what doesn't, because there are some opposing and conflicting ways of looking at grief and how it's viewed and how it's worked through and all of those things. And that comes with time. You're not going to, I know for me, like, I went through lots of accounts, and like I said, the first people I started following was other women who were just as sad as I was. And that's where I started.
Yeah.
But then I was like, kind of like what you said, then I was like, yeah, but why do I feel like this all the time? Like, I don't want to feel like this forever.
Right.
Like,
right.
I refuse.
And now what? Yeah.
Exactly. Now what? Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I found, again, I think there's more now than there were back then. But I was like, where are all the accounts that tells me, like, what to do next?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got lucky to find someone who was all about that,
Yeah.
And so I love what you just said to everybody, and I hope everybody, if you're in those beginning stages, you don't feel the pressure to do a whole lot right now, and you just simply just look for those little nuggets, go on social media, look for other people who relate to you, look for other people who are speaking your language, who maybe I know what, this girl, Catherine Lazar, she was one of the first people that I ever found. And the reason I loved following accounts like hers is because I was like, she's saying out loud all the things that are going through my mind.
Yeah.
And her and I had very similar stories. So that was another reason I was able to connect with her, is because we had very similar stories. She was just kind of like almost a year ahead of me.
Okay.
And I was like, she's saying everything that's in my head that I'm afraid to say out loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
So connecting with people and stuff, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, and I'll say too, you reminded me of I think a really valuable point as well. I think it can really depend on the kind of processor you are, whether you're like an internal processor, external processor. I'll use myself as an example when talking about early grief and where to start and what's helpful. For me, having a safe container, i.e. my therapist, to verbally process all that had happened with was hugely helpful for me. I will say that's 100% not true for everyone, especially if it's incredibly traumatizing. I say that there's rarely significant loss that is not considered traumatic.
Yeah.
But there can be certain elements where just talking about it and retelling the story, can that re-traumatize you if you're not in the right hands? Absolutely. So that caveat aside, for me, I am a verbal processor, and there were certain elements to my story and being a caregiver and walking my dad home, certain details about that and images and memories that I could not share with anyone, that I didn't want to share with anyone, because they're really painful and hard to hear and hard for me to talk about. And I needed to go to someone, and this is sometimes I laugh because I'm like, this was total like eldest daughter move of me. I'm like, I need to go hire someone to support me because I don't want to do this to anyone in my life. But having someone to really say like, I'm not coming to you so that you can fix it, but like this pain needs witnessing. I need to say out loud, I can't believe I had to do this, or I can't believe I had to witness this, or I can't believe I had to have this conversation or do this awful task, 10 minutes after he took his last breath. Like all of those pieces, they needed somewhere for me and my body and my system, how I process, they needed somewhere to go. So I will also say that piece, like have very low expectations of yourself. And if you can afford it, I know it's such a privilege. If you can find someone that is trauma informed, that is grief informed, also finding a space where you can just show up with whatever is coming up for you in that moment once a week can be such a gift.
Yeah, and you're right. It is such a privilege, but looking back, it's worth. I was blessed. I didn't have to pay a dime because I was blessed with sessions from a very good friend. But looking back, like I would have spent every penny that it cost. Like you said, even just have an outlet with a trusted person where you can just, because so my story was kind of twofold. Like we lost our daughter and she was stillborn, and then my husband got really, really sick. Like he was in the hospital. He was super infected, super ill. He was in the hospital. His longest stay was like 50 days.
Wow.
He had a major surgery. This was all 1 year after our loss, but it was like a slow spiral,
Yeah.
And so right when I felt like I was kind of like I could breathe again, like after the loss, is when my husband started getting really sick. And so I have a lot of trauma tied up into both of those scenarios. And I remember just like you said, I remember thinking like, does anybody even know that I had to do this? Does anybody even know that I had to make these decisions? Like, does anybody know the things that I have seen, or the the things that I've had to do? And it's like it can literally eat you alive if it is not brought to the table. I think a lot of people are afraid in like a spiritual sense, or like in a manifestation sense, to say things out loud because they don't want to make them true. And I am a Christian, and so I go to church, and I talk to a lot of people with spiritual backgrounds. And so I think in that world, people are very afraid to like say things out loud. They don't want to like give it that power. And it's like, yeah, but your body like internalizes these feelings and these traumatic events and all of these things. And if you don't give it a voice, or you don't bring it to the table, like it literally ate my husband alive. Like his sickness like literally spiraled out of control because he wasn't willing to bring his I'll say thoughts and feelings to the surface. And I have literally no doubt that is why my husband got sick. So that's a really good point, and that is definitely something that I would also recommend from personal experience. Like, you've got to give those things a voice. You got to give them in a safe place, and a place that you can trust, a person that you can trust. Give it a voice and allow yourself to like talk through these things, because there's so many layers of loss and trauma that people don't, if you haven't experienced it, you don't know. Like when you tell me that you were bedside, to your father with cancer, like, okay, no, my husband didn't have cancer, but I was bedside to my husband in a hospital for months and months.
Yeah.
So my brain, when you tell me that, my brain goes to all of the things that I know nobody else knows that you experienced during those times, but I know you experienced it because I probably experienced a lot of similar things.
Yeah.
And so finding those people who you can talk to is just like, it's paramount. It's so important.
And something I love to say, or kind of not say, it's not like I made this fact up, to remind people of is energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And so, and emotions live in the body, not in the brain. And so think about the incredible amount of emotion and energy your body is carrying, all of those pieces that you named, all of the secondary loss, all of these parts that hold so much pain and so much trauma and so much, just devastation. When we're holding that all in and feeling like I can't share this with someone because it's a burden to them, so I'll just wrap my arms around it, right? That's when sickness happens. That is when anxiety spikes. That is when
Yeah.
shutdown happens, and so giving that energy somewhere to go and a way to move, even if that's sitting in front of a paid professional and bawling your freaking eyes out and saying, I can't believe this piece happened. You are feeling the co-regulation of that safe person. You are seeing them see you saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're letting, your tears are moving the emotion. Like there's so much in that one interaction that can help us not hold on to that. And so kind of not meaning to, but tying it back to that perfectionist discussion, I think not wanting to be seen as a burden or like needing too much from people, we do have the tendency to hold on to things alone or not really know how to ask for the support that we really need. So again, having that safe space sometimes can be, yeah, pretty crucial.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I'm thinking back to my first session with my grief coach, and literally all she did was ask me like what happened. And so I retold the story probably for the first time that I had ever told anybody start to finish. And I can't explain how it was exhausting. Like I was exhausted the rest
Yeah.
of the day after
Yeah.
I told that story. But I literally felt that energy, like you just described, that energy. Like I was like,
It moved.
oh, it moved out of my body into the phone somehow. And I sobbed. It wasn't fun. Like, it's not
No.
like it was fun. I didn't enjoy it, but I
Yeah.
was like, I felt so, like, just such an energy shift after that
Yeah.
first phone call. And that's all we did. She didn't say anything. I
Yeah.
talked the entire time. and that's how our
Yeah.
relationship started. And that's how our journey started off. And it was so incredibly helpful. So it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, it's like releasing, it's like a pressure release valve. You're like, can I
Yes.
just get a little of this out right now? It's going to be painful
Yes.
and it sucks and it seems counterintuitive. But yeah, that a little bit of relief and more spaciousness in the body is a good thing. Yeah.
For sure. I love that analogy. Well, that is kind of all of the questions that I had for you today. So I think that
Okay.
kind of wraps up our session, but I'm so, so grateful for all of your wisdom and your knowledge that you shared with my listeners. So Rio, thank you so much for being here today and just taking time out of your day to record with me.
Thank you for having me. That was a lovely conversation.
Of course. And just one more thing before
Yeah.
we go. I just want to give you an opportunity to just share with everyone, like where they can find you, how they can connect with you, and whatever you want to put out there.
Sure. So we've been talking about my Instagram space. So you can find me at And That's Grief. I also have a weekly-ish newsletter called Touching the Fire, where I do, Instagram is kind of like the bite-sized pieces, although I do jam-pack a lot of information in Instagram.
You do. You do.
My newsletter is even kind of deeper dives into some of those topics, and also where I get a little bit more personal over on Substack. And then this summer in August, I will be starting my next group. It will be, really a blend of the somatics, kind of what's happening in our bodies. We'll be doing a little bit of parts work, i.e. like our perfectionist part. So I'll be working with the different parts of us that have shown up in our grief journey, where they are in the body, how we connect with them, and then we're going to kind of alchemize and take that energy and create some art with it. So at the end of the program, you'll walk away with like a visual representation of moving through these different pieces of grief. So that's an 8-week program, and I can send you the wait list for that link as well.
Well, that sounds amazing, first of all.
I'm
That
so
sounds
excited. I've been
that is
working on this for
super
like
cool.
over a year. I can't wait.
Wow, that is super cool. Well, first of all, congratulations. That's awesome. I
Thank
know
you.
how exciting those things can like feel when they, after like so much work, they finally come out, they come to the surface. So
Yeah.
that's super cool. And I'll add all of that info in the show notes for sure,
Cool.
so people can, find you and stuff. So, well, thank
Amazing.
you again so much, Rio,
Thank
for
you.
being here today. Thank you to everyone who is listening. I hope you all enjoyed this episode with Rio Richards. Don't forget, a positive review goes a really long way for me. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for more episodes just like this one. I can't wait to chat with all of you again really soon. Signing off for now, your hope dealer, Emmy Smaz.